The evening began with a sense of importance that was hard to ignore. The city streets were alive with lights and movement, but inside the elegant restaurant, the world seemed to pause for a moment. The billionaire CEO arrived first, stepping out of a sleek black car with his signature confident stride. He was known everywhere for his sharp business acumen, and tonight was no exception. Tonight was supposed to be a night where a massive deal, one worth $3.5 billion, would be solidified over fine wine and careful conversation. He had prepared meticulously for this dinner, reviewing every note, studying every angle, and rehearsing every potential line of discussion. Every detail mattered to him, and he expected nothing less than perfection. As he walked through the entrance, the soft clinking of cutlery and the low murmur of conversations filled the air. The restaurant smelled of rich sauces and freshly baked bread. The ambience was designed to impress, and it did so effortlessly. The tables were polished to a shine, the lighting was warm and inviting, and the waitstaff moved quietly, attending to the guests with practiced grace. It was in this environment, one that combined sophistication and subtle energy, that the CEO felt most at home, yet tonight even he could not control every variable. He was seated at the corner table, a strategic position that allowed him to observe the entire room and the incoming guests. His business partners arrived shortly after, men and women of influence, dressed impeccably, carrying with them the weight of international markets and investments. The introductions were formal, firm handshakes and polite smiles, each acknowledging the gravity of the occasion. The CEO greeted each of them with a precise mix of friendliness and authority, establishing his role as both host and leader of the evening. Behind the table, a waitress prepared for what would become a tense dance of service and expectation. She had worked in the restaurant for several years, handling high-profile clients and delicate situations with calm professionalism. Her eyes were alert, scanning the room, noting which tables needed attention, which guests preferred quiet, and which orders required extra care. She moved with a practiced rhythm, balancing trays and taking notes without drawing attention to herself. Tonight was another night of high stakes, and though she could not know the outcome, she understood the importance of her role. Each detail, each step, could influence the experience of the diners, for better or worse. The CEO ordered quickly, confident in his choice. A dish he knew was both refined and satisfying. The partners followed suit, each trusting his recommendations and the restaurant's reputation. The conversation began cautiously, polite inquiries about the weather, travel, and shared acquaintances. Yet beneath the surface, the air was charged with anticipation. Each word, each gesture was calculated, intended to convey competence, reliability, and shared interest. The CEO leaned forward slightly, signaling engagement and leadership, while his partners observed, assessing the tone and dynamics of the gathering. Small things began to disrupt the rhythm of the evening. A glass was placed slightly to the left rather than directly in front of one partner. An order arrived slightly later than expected. These were minor imperfections, trivial by any normal standard, but to the CEO, whose life revolved around precision and control, they were glaring flaws. He felt the irritation rising within him, a quiet storm that he struggled to contain. His eyes narrowed as he watched the waitress approach the table, carrying the tray with delicate care. He noted her movements, her posture, her attention to detail. There was nothing overtly wrong, yet the tiniest lapse, the slightest hesitation, seemed magnified under the weight of the night's expectations. The waitress, unaware of the inner turmoil she was about to encounter, approached with her usual calm demeanor. She smiled politely, offering the dishes with a gentle nod. She balanced the tray expertly, ensuring nothing would spill or tip. Her professionalism was evident, and yet it would not be enough to satisfy the CEO tonight. He leaned back in his chair, assessing her, the meal, the table arrangement, as if judging not just the service but the character behind it. In his world, control equaled success, and anything less was a failure. The partners continued to engage in conversation, discussing markets, trends, and potential opportunities. The CEO spoke with authority, weaving in insights and data that showcased his understanding and dominance in his field. The conversation was lively, Yet underneath it all, tension was growing. The minor imperfections in service that might have gone unnoticed in another setting were now seen as reflections of a lack of competence, a slight that threatened to undermine the night's purpose. The CEO's gaze returned to the waitress repeatedly, evaluating, critiquing silently, preparing for what he would say next. The waitress, though sensing a slight change in the atmosphere, maintained her composure. She had dealt with demanding clients before, and she understood that her role was to remain professional, to serve without letting emotion dictate her actions. She smiled, responded politely, and moved to the next table, leaving the CEO and his partners to continue their discussion. Her actions, small and seemingly inconsequential, were guided by experience and a calm understanding of human behavior. She knew that in the world of high-pressure service, patience and grace could diffuse tension in ways that words sometimes could not. As the meal progressed, the CEO grew more restless. He had expected the evening to unfold flawlessly, every interaction meticulously aligned with his vision of success. Each delay, each minor misstep, now felt amplified, a disruption in the carefully constructed flow. His partners noticed the change in his demeanor, the subtle shift from composed authority to quiet irritation. They exchanged glances, sensing the tension, yet choosing to remain polite, unwilling to react until the dynamics of the situation were more apparent. The CEO's expectations were high, and he was determined to assert them, believing that any deviation from perfection was unacceptable. In that moment, the stage was set for a clash between authority and dignity, between expectation and reality. The waitress, unaware of the storm brewing, continued her service with grace, embodying professionalism in its purest form. She had no reason to anticipate the confrontation that would soon unfold, and yet her actions would become a central part of a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The CEO's insistence on perfection, combined with the high stakes of the evening, created a tension that was both fragile and volatile, waiting for a spark to ignite it into a defining moment. The room continued its rhythm of refined dining, clinking glasses, soft conversation, and attentive service. Yet beneath the surface, the dynamics at the CEO's table were shifting, a silent undercurrent of pressure building toward a point of impact. The partners remained courteous, observing the CEO's behavior with careful eyes, while the waitress moved gracefully between tables, unaware that her presence had already captured the focus of a man accustomed to control and obedience. The stage was now fully set for the evening's drama, where personal pride, professional ambition, and human dignity would collide in a moment that neither the CEO nor the waitress could have fully anticipated. The atmosphere at the table had changed, though no one could yet put words to it. The CEO had become quiet for a moment, a tension in his jaw, a narrowing of his eyes that suggested he was measuring every detail around him. The minor imperfections from earlier, the slightly misplaced glass, the small delay in service, were no longer just annoyances. They had transformed into irritations that demanded attention. The waitress, moving with the same calm and professionalism as before, returned to his table with a gentle smile, holding a tray carefully balanced with glasses of wine. He watched her approach, his mind already formulating words sharper than they had been a moment ago. His partners noticed the change, the slight edge in his movements, the subtle shift in tone that suggested something was about to happen. They exchanged brief glances, uneasy but unsure of how to intervene. They had come to expect a certain brilliance from this CEO, but brilliance, as they had learned over the years, often came hand in hand with impatience and an unyielding need for control. When the waitress placed the glasses on the table, one slightly askew from his ideal alignment, he could not hold back any longer. The word slipped out before he fully realized it, a word meant to punish, to assert dominance, and to signal that mistakes, however small, were unacceptable. "Foolish," he said, louder than necessary, eyes fixed on her. The word hung in the air like a sharp blade, cutting through the soft murmurs of the restaurant. His partner stiffened, shocked by the unprofessionalism displayed at the table. Some instinctively recoiled, while others held their composure, waiting to see how the scene would unfold. The waitress froze for a fraction of a second, her smile faltering ever so slightly, but only for a moment. Years of handling high-pressure situations had taught her the value of composure. She met his gaze calmly, her expression neutral but dignified, acknowledging the comment without allowing it to break her professionalism. She took a breath, nodded slightly, and continued to serve the table without another word. Her response, quiet and restrained, contrasted sharply with the CEO's sudden outburst, highlighting the difference between arrogance and grace. The CEO, feeling the weight of the evening and the unspoken judgments of his partners, became more agitated. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the reactions of those at the table. He noticed the slight frowns, the polite yet distant glances, and the subtle signs of discomfort. Every reaction seemed to amplify his own frustration. In his mind, the waitress should have instantly corrected every minor error, anticipated every need, and bowed to the authority of his position. Instead, she maintained her calm, a silent defiance that unsettled him more than any argument could. His partners, sensing the tension, tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. They discussed market trends, financial projections, and international partnerships, attempting to maintain the professionalism that the CEO's outburst had threatened to undo. Yet the air remained heavy, charged with unspoken awareness of what had just occurred. The CEO tried to redirect the discussion, injecting enthusiasm and authority into his words, but the subtle shift in perception had already taken root. The minor imperfections in service were now magnified in the minds of those observing, and the CEO's response had overshadowed his own expertise. The waitress, meanwhile, continued her work with steady hands and composed movements. She moved to refill water glasses, clear plates, and offer any additional assistance needed, all while maintaining the same calm expression. Her professionalism acted as a silent counterpoint to the CEO's aggression. She did not argue, explain, or justify herself. She simply did her job with dignity, a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with the CEO's impatience. Her actions began to influence the perception of the table, and even the partners, who had initially been caught off guard, began to notice the poise with which she handled the situation. As the meal progressed, the CEO found himself increasingly frustrated. Each course arrived perfectly cooked, each glass refilled with care, yet his irritation did not subside. He expected not only perfection but also immediate acknowledgement of his authority. The absence of fear or panic in the waitress's demeanor was, in his mind, a form of defiance. He had underestimated the subtle power of calm professionalism. The partners, observing this dynamic, began to see a new side of the CEO, one that was vulnerable to minor disruptions and quick to display temper under pressure. The waitress, sensing the subtle shifts in mood at the table, continued her work without letting her own emotions interfere. She had learned long ago that in moments of tension, her presence and calmness could diffuse situations more effectively than words. She moved with intention, ensuring that her actions were precise, thoughtful, and respectful. Her demeanor quietly reminded everyone at the table, including the CEO, that competence and dignity were not dependent on position or wealth, but on conduct and character. The CEO's partners began to exchange glances, sharing silent communication about the situation. They noted the contrast between the CEO's impatience and the waitress's steady composure. This observation, subtle yet powerful, began to alter the dynamic at the table. The conversation shifted, no longer solely about the deal or financial strategies, but about the atmosphere, the interactions, and the human elements that were influencing the evening. The partners became more cautious, measuring their responses, aware that any engagement could further escalate tension or defuse it, depending on their approach. In the background, the restaurant continued its rhythm of service. Other staff moved seamlessly, ensuring that the environment remained pleasant and uninterrupted for other guests. Yet, the tension at the CEO's table had created a small bubble of focus, where every action, glance, and word carried weight. The waitress, though technically just another staff member, had become a central figure in this unfolding drama. Her calmness was not a challenge but a mirror, reflecting the CEO's behavior and prompting self-reflection, though he did not yet recognize it. As dessert was served, the CEO's irritation reached a tipping point. He realized that despite his position, wealth, and influence, he could not control every aspect of the evening. The business partners remained polite, yet their engagement had waned, their earlier enthusiasm dampened by the unexpected display of temperament. The CEO began to understand, if only subconsciously, that this moment could have far-reaching consequences. The small interaction with the waitress, seemingly trivial, had set off a chain reaction that threatened to undermine the entire purpose of the dinner. The waitress, continuing her service, remained unaware of the full extent of the impact her calm professionalism was having. She focused on the immediate task, refilling a glass here, clearing a plate there, ensuring that the table was cared for without drawing attention to herself. Her actions, simple yet deliberate, demonstrated a quiet mastery of her role. The CEO, observing this, felt a mix of frustration and admiration he could not admit aloud. He had underestimated the influence of respect and composure in a setting where he had assumed power and control would dominate. The evening, intended to be a display of wealth, power, and strategic negotiation, had shifted subtly into a lesson on human behavior. The CEO's impatience and sharp words had created an imbalance, while the waitress's calm and steady presence restored equilibrium in a way he had not anticipated. The partners, observing this dynamic, were reminded that true leadership extended beyond knowledge and authority. It required empathy, patience, and respect for those around you, regardless of their position. By the time coffee was served, the CEO began to feel the weight of the evening. The minor errors he had magnified, and the outburst he had delivered, now loomed over the table like shadows. He recognized, too late perhaps, that the impression left by his words might overshadow the very expertise he had intended to showcase. The waitress, meanwhile, continued her service with quiet dignity, unaffected by the criticism and unperturbed by the tension she had unwittingly witnessed. Her professionalism had maintained the integrity of the evening, ensuring that the atmosphere did not completely collapse. As the guests prepared to leave, the CEO's frustration simmered beneath the surface. He had expected flawless control, immediate acknowledgement, and unwavering compliance, and he had received something very different. The partners, polite yet distant, had witnessed the interaction and would carry it forward in their own assessments. The waitress, in her quiet, unassuming way, had demonstrated a strength of character that contrasted with the CEO's impatience and arrogance. The evening had taken a turn neither the CEO nor the business partners had anticipated, and the impact of that turn would resonate far beyond the walls of the restaurant. The evening had reached a point where the tension at the table was almost tangible. The CEO could feel it, a subtle but undeniable shift in the mood that he could neither control nor ignore. His business partners, who had arrived with enthusiasm and expectation, were now more reserved, speaking cautiously and observing his every move. They were seasoned professionals, accustomed to negotiation and strategy, but the unexpected display of temper and impatience had caught them off guard. They exchanged subtle glances, their expressions measured, waiting to see how the CEO would handle the growing unease. The waitress continued her work with quiet composure, moving from table to table with the same calm efficiency that had characterized her service all evening. Each step was deliberate, each gesture careful and unobtrusive, yet there was an undeniable strength in the way she conducted herself. She did not respond to the CEO's earlier insult with anger or apology. She simply continued to do her job, maintaining the dignity and professionalism that had become her trademark. This quiet confidence began to have an effect on the atmosphere at the table, creating a contrast between her composure and the CEO's restless energy. As the CEO tried to regain control of the conversation, he noticed that the partners were no longer fully engaged. Their nods were polite but restrained, their smiles courteous but distant. The words he spoke, intended to impress and persuade, seemed to fall flat. The minor disruption caused by the earlier incident had evolved into a significant obstacle, subtly undermining his authority and influence. The CEO's frustration grew, a simmering irritation that he could not fully conceal. He leaned forward, attempting to inject energy and urgency into the discussion, but the momentum he sought had already shifted. The partners began to ask questions not about the deal itself, but about the dynamics of the evening. They inquired about the service, the atmosphere, and even the reactions of the restaurant staff. Their questions were polite but probing, revealing that their confidence in the CEO's ability to manage not only the business deal but also the environment around him had been shaken. The CEO answered, but his responses lacked the assuredness they had anticipated. The gap between his expectation and the reality of the situation became increasingly apparent. Meanwhile, the waitress moved closer to the table to clear some empty glasses. She maintained a neutral expression, her hands steady, her movements deliberate. She spoke only when necessary, offering gentle comments or acknowledgments, never allowing the earlier insult to dictate her behavior. Her calmness acted as a stabilizing force, subtly reminding everyone at the table, including the CEO, that composure and professionalism carried their own weight, independent of status or authority. This quiet display of integrity created a ripple effect, influencing the partners' perception of the evening and, ultimately, their impression of the CEO. The CEO's mind raced as he tried to calculate the impact of the situation. The $3.5 billion deal, once seemingly within his grasp, now felt precarious. He realized that his own behavior had created uncertainty, not in the terms of the deal itself, but in the trust and respect of those he sought to influence. Every gesture, every word, every reaction at the table was now amplified in significance. The partners, sensing the tension, began to withdraw slightly, their engagement cautious, their focus split between evaluating the CEO and observing the dynamics unfolding before them. In an attempt to regain authority, the CEO introduced new topics, highlighting potential strategies, projections, and opportunities. His tone was firm, his words carefully chosen, yet the underlying tension remained. The partners listened, but their attention was tempered by the lingering memory of the earlier exchange. They were experienced enough to recognize that a single moment of impatience could reveal patterns of behavior, and they now had reason to question how such behavior might influence future interactions and decisions. The subtle power of the waitress's quiet composure had already begun to outweigh the CEO's attempts to assert control through words alone. As the dessert plates arrived, the CEO's agitation became more apparent. He noticed small details he had previously overlooked: the alignment of the cutlery, the angle of the wine glasses, the pace at which the dessert was served. These details, minor in any other context, now seemed amplified, each one a reflection of perceived incompetence. The partners, observing this shift, began to take mental notes, their judgments forming silently. They recognized the potential implications of such behavior, not only for the evening's negotiations but for ongoing and future business relationships. The waitress, continuing her professional service, moved with grace and attention to detail. She placed the desserts carefully, ensured that each guest had the necessary utensils, and offered polite assistance where needed. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the CEO's visible frustration, creating a silent narrative at the table. Composure and dignity often hold more influence than wealth and authority alone. The partners, perceptive and experienced, began to internalize this observation, recognizing that the CEO's reaction had shifted the balance of respect and influence. The conversation turned to the financial aspects of the deal, and the CEO attempted to steer the discussion back to the familiar terrain of numbers and strategy. He spoke with authority, presenting projections, analyses, and potential outcomes, yet the partners' engagement was cautious, their responses measured. The earlier incident had subtly undermined the CEO's perceived control, and no amount of data could fully restore the original confidence in the room. The dynamics had shifted irreversibly, influenced as much by human interaction as by business acumen. The waitress, sensing that her role in the evening had become central, continued to serve with quiet competence. She did not seek recognition, nor did she attempt to assert influence. She focused on the immediate tasks, ensuring that the table was maintained without drawing attention. Her presence, unassuming yet powerful, highlighted the CEO's behavior in a way that words could not. The partners, observing this, began to appreciate the subtle lessons embedded in the evening. Respect, patience, and composure often speak louder than ambition and authority. The CEO's frustration deepened as he realized that his attempts to regain control were only partially effective. The partners were listening, yet their engagement lacked the enthusiasm and trust he had anticipated. Each word he spoke was weighed against the earlier display of impatience, and each gesture was scrutinized for signs of temperament. The subtle power of human behavior, embodied in the waitress's calm professionalism, had begun to eclipse the CEO's authority, creating a situation that was both unexpected and challenging. As the evening continued, the CEO attempted to mask his irritation with charm and strategic dialogue. He highlighted opportunities, emphasized potential benefits, and sought to reassert his dominance in the conversation. Yet the partners remained measured, their focus partially diverted by the earlier tension. They had observed the dynamics at the table, and while the discussion of the deal was important, the behavior and interaction of those present carried equal weight. The CEO, despite his expertise and preparation, had underestimated the significance of human behavior in high-stakes negotiations. The waitress, completing her service tasks, moved with confidence and precision. She interacted with the table only as necessary, maintaining her composure and professionalism throughout. Her demeanor served as a subtle reminder to all present that competence and dignity are not dictated by position or wealth but by actions and conduct. The CEO, increasingly aware of the impact of his earlier words, began to recognize, albeit reluctantly, the influence of this quiet, steady presence on the partners' perceptions. As the final courses were cleared and coffee was served, the CEO felt a growing unease. The deal, which had seemed secure at the beginning of the evening, now appeared uncertain. The partners, polite yet cautious, had observed a side of the CEO that contrasted with the image he had hoped to present. The waitress, through her calm professionalism, had highlighted the gap between expectation and reality, subtly influencing the outcome of the evening. The CEO realized, with a mixture of frustration and reflection, that the dynamics at the table were no longer fully under his control. The partners, in quiet conversation, began to deliberate among themselves. They weighed the potential of the deal against the human elements they had observed. The CEO, despite his expertise and influence, had created a situation in which his behavior was under scrutiny, and the outcome of the negotiation was now uncertain. The waitress, without seeking attention or recognition, had demonstrated the power of composure, patience, and professionalism in a high-pressure environment. By the end of the evening, it was clear that the $3.5 billion deal was no longer simply a matter of strategy and negotiation. The interpersonal dynamics, the reactions to behavior, and the subtle influence of human conduct had reshaped the course of events. The CEO's impatience and sharp words had set in motion a chain reaction, while the waitress's quiet dignity had created a counterbalance that would influence the partners' decisions. The evening, intended to secure a monumental business achievement, had become a lesson in human behavior, respect, and the unforeseen impact of seemingly small actions. The final moments of the evening carried a weight that the CEO had not anticipated. The initial excitement, the polished introductions, and the carefully rehearsed discussions had given way to a tense and uncertain atmosphere. The partners, once fully engaged and eager to explore the opportunity of a $3.5 billion deal, were now restrained and cautious. The earlier incident with the waitress had left a subtle but profound impact, and every word, gesture, and expression carried significance far beyond the immediate moment. The CEO attempted to regain his composure, straightening his posture and speaking in a measured tone. He reiterated key points of the proposal, emphasizing projected growth, strategic advantages, and potential returns. Yet, despite his expertise and preparation, the partners were visibly distracted. Their attention wavered, shifting from the content of the discussion to the interpersonal dynamics that had unfolded. The CEO's frustration grew as he realized that the deal was no longer solely about numbers and strategy but about trust, respect, and perception. The waitress, continuing her service with calm efficiency, moved with deliberate care. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and ensured that the table remained orderly, all without drawing attention to herself. Her professionalism acted as a stabilizing presence, highlighting the contrast between her composed demeanor and the CEO's restless energy. She did not speak unless necessary, yet her actions communicated a quiet strength and dignity that spoke volumes. The partners, observing her composure, could not help but recognize the difference between someone handling pressure with grace and someone overwhelmed by it. The CEO, sensing the shift in the partners' engagement, tried to accelerate the conversation, urging them to focus on the advantages of the deal. He highlighted competitive advantages, market opportunities, and the long-term potential of collaboration. His words were precise, his analysis thorough, yet the undercurrent of tension at the table remained. The partners responded politely, yet their interactions were measured, cautious, and distant. They had observed a side of the CEO that contrasted sharply with the professional image he had intended to project. Small moments continued to influence the outcome. A subtle nod, a slight pause before answering a question, or a carefully measured tone, all contributed to the partner's perception. The earlier insult to the waitress had created a ripple effect, casting doubt on the CEO's temperament and his ability to manage interpersonal dynamics in high-pressure situations. The partners, experienced and perceptive, began to weigh these observations alongside the financial merits of the deal. As the dessert was cleared, the CEO attempted to summarize the discussion, reiterating the strategic benefits and the urgency of the opportunity. He leaned forward, trying to project confidence and control, but the partners' responses were careful and non-committal. They asked clarifying questions, not about the business itself, but about the CEO's vision for managing teams, relationships, and operational challenges. The focus had shifted subtly but significantly from the numbers to the human factors, and the CEO felt the impact of this shift keenly. The waitress, quietly attentive, continued to serve without faltering. She moved seamlessly between tasks, her presence calm and unassuming. She did not seek recognition, nor did she attempt to influence the outcome of the discussion. Yet her professionalism, her ability to maintain composure under pressure, served as a silent reminder of the importance of respect, patience, and human dignity. The partners, who had witnessed her handling of the earlier situation, now viewed the evening through a lens shaped by her example. The CEO realized, with growing unease, that his earlier outburst had created a lasting impression. The partners were now questioning not only the deal but also his judgment, leadership, and temperament. The magnitude of the potential loss became clear. This was no longer a matter of negotiation over terms, but a question of trust and credibility. The $3.5 billion opportunity, once within reach, now seemed to hang precariously in the balance. Attempts to steer the conversation back to the technical details were met with polite but firm resistance. The partners' questions reflected their concern about leadership style, decision-making under pressure, and the ability to maintain composure in challenging situations. The CEO, though knowledgeable and skilled in strategy, found himself navigating a terrain that was increasingly unfamiliar and difficult. The human element, once considered secondary to the numbers, had now become central to the decision-making process. Throughout this unfolding drama, the waitress continued her work with quiet dignity. She refilled coffee cups, cleared remaining plates, and ensured that the table remained orderly. Her calm, professional presence contrasted with the CEO's frustration and served as an unspoken reminder of the importance of conduct and composure. The partners, experienced and discerning, could not ignore this demonstration of grace under pressure. It influenced their perception of the evening, subtly shaping their evaluation of the CEO and the potential deal. As the conversation drew to a close, the partners began to indicate their decision. They spoke with measured words, emphasizing the need for careful consideration and reflection. The CEO, sensing the gravity of the moment, pressed for immediate agreement, highlighting urgency and opportunity. Yet the partners remained steadfast in their cautious approach, reflecting a shift in priorities from financial opportunity to confidence in leadership and judgment. The waitress, completing her final tasks, maintained her composed demeanor. She quietly observed the interactions, ensuring that her actions supported the overall service without drawing attention. Her professionalism, consistent and unwavering, had become an integral part of the evening's dynamic. The CEO, increasingly aware of the subtle yet powerful influence of her presence, felt a mixture of frustration and reluctant acknowledgement. He had underestimated the impact of dignity, patience, and calm composure in a high-pressure environment. The partners, after careful deliberation, made their decision. They expressed appreciation for the CEO's insights and expertise, but ultimately declined to proceed with the deal at that moment. Their decision was delivered with politeness and professionalism, yet the message was clear. The earlier interactions, the display of impatience, and the lack of composure had influenced their choice. The CEO, despite his knowledge and preparation, had been undone not by the financial merits of the deal but by the human dynamics at the table. The waitress, finishing her duties, quietly moved away from the table. She had no awareness of the full impact of her presence. Yet her calm professionalism had played a pivotal role in shaping the outcome of the evening. The CEO, left to reflect on the unfolding events, experienced a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and dawning realization. The $3.5 billion deal, once seemingly secure, had slipped away due to factors beyond spreadsheets, projections, and analysis. In the quiet aftermath, the restaurant continued its rhythm of service. Other guests remained unaware of the drama that had unfolded, while the CEO contemplated the consequences of his actions. The partners, experienced and discerning, carried away not only the financial considerations of the evening but also a nuanced understanding of leadership, temperament, and human interaction. The waitress, through her calm and steady presence, had demonstrated the subtle yet profound power of professionalism and dignity. The CEO's reflection on the evening revealed a stark lesson. Success is not measured solely by knowledge, preparation, or authority. Human behavior, respect, and composure play an equally vital role in shaping outcomes. The incident at the table, the words spoken, and the reactions observed had irrevocably altered the course of the negotiation. The $3.5 billion opportunity was lost, not through lack of expertise, but through a failure to appreciate the importance of respect, patience, and human interaction in high-stakes environments. As the restaurant emptied and the evening drew to a close, the CEO was left alone with his thoughts. He considered the sequence of events, the reactions of the partners, and the role of the waitress's professionalism. The lesson was clear and difficult. In business and in life, the treatment of others, the ability to maintain composure, and the respect shown in every interaction can have consequences far beyond the immediate moment. The evening had provided a vivid and unforgettable demonstration of this truth, leaving an indelible impression on all involved. The night ended with a quiet weight that seemed to linger in the air long after the last guests had departed. The restaurant, once filled with the lively hum of conversation and the clatter of cutlery, now felt almost empty, the soft glow of the lamps casting gentle shadows over the polished tables. The CEO sat alone for a moment, reflecting on the evening and the events that had unfolded. The $3.5 billion deal, once thought to be within reach, had slipped away in a way that was both subtle and unmistakable. It was not a loss caused by financial miscalculations or lack of preparation, but by the human dynamics that had played out at the table. He thought about the moments that had defined the evening, each one small in isolation but cumulatively powerful. The minor errors in service, the delay of a dish, the misaligned glass, had all become magnified under the pressure of high expectations. His own response, sharp and unrestrained, had set the tone for the evening in a way he could not reverse. The word he had used, the judgment he had passed, had left a mark not only on the waitress but on the partners and the outcome of the deal. In that moment, he realized that influence and authority could be undermined not by strategy or knowledge, but by impatience and lack of respect. The waitress, finishing her final tasks, moved through the dining area with her usual quiet efficiency. She had been unaware of the full scope of the impact she had made, yet her calm professionalism had been a stabilizing force throughout the evening. She had not sought recognition or approval, nor had she expected gratitude. She had simply done her job with dignity, skill, and grace. Her presence had reminded everyone at the table, including the CEO, that composure and respect were powerful forms of influence, sometimes more effective than authority or wealth. The CEO replayed the evening in his mind, examining the interactions, the words spoken, and the subtle cues that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. The partners, polite yet discerning, had observed every nuance. They had not only evaluated the proposal but had also measured character, temperament, and interpersonal skill. The small incident with the waitress had revealed a side of the CEO that was unexpected and, in the eyes of the partners, concerning. The deal, substantial as it was in financial terms, had become secondary to questions about leadership, judgment, and emotional intelligence. He thought about the lessons he had learned, difficult truths that were not easily acknowledged. Knowledge and preparation, though essential, were not enough. Success in business required the ability to navigate human behavior, to maintain composure under pressure, and to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their position. The waitress had embodied these qualities, demonstrating through her actions the quiet strength of professionalism. The CEO recognized, perhaps for the first time in a long while, that power without respect could not achieve lasting success. The partners had left with politeness and civility, but their decision was final. The $3.5 billion opportunity was lost, and the CEO was left to reflect on the reasons why. He understood that his own behavior had influenced their judgment in ways that no amount of expertise could counteract. The evening had provided a vivid lesson in the importance of humility, patience, and the human element in all interactions. He realized that wealth and authority could not replace the need for respect, composure, and understanding. The waitress returned to the back of the restaurant, her duties complete for the evening. She did not consider herself a central figure in the events, yet her calm professionalism had been pivotal. She had maintained her dignity in the face of criticism and maintained focus on her responsibilities. Her actions had created a contrast that highlighted the CEO's impatience and temperament, subtly shaping the partner's perception and ultimately influencing the outcome of the deal. In doing so, she demonstrated the profound impact of behavior, conduct, and integrity in moments of high pressure. The CEO continued to sit, contemplating the evening's events, the decisions made, and the lessons learned. He reflected on the fact that influence is fragile and that respect, once lost, is difficult to regain. The human dynamics at the table had proven more consequential than financial analysis, projections, or strategy. The subtle power of calm, composed professionalism had overshadowed authority and wealth, reminding him that true leadership encompasses more than knowledge and control. It requires empathy, patience, and the ability to navigate complex interpersonal situations with dignity. He realized that the incident with the waitress was not merely about service or a single word spoken. It was about the broader implications of behavior and character. In high-pressure situations, every action and reaction carries weight. The way one treats others, even in seemingly small or trivial moments, can have far-reaching consequences. The lesson was stark and unforgettable. Respect, composure, and human decency are essential components of success, equally as important as expertise, strategy, or ambition. The CEO began to see the evening from a new perspective. He acknowledged that the partner's decision was influenced not by the numbers alone, but by their assessment of his character and leadership. The loss of the deal was a consequence of his own actions, a result of impatience and a lack of consideration for those around him. In contrast, the waitress had maintained her composure, professionalism, and dignity, demonstrating the subtle but undeniable power of behavior and character in shaping outcomes. Her influence had been quiet, unassuming, yet profoundly impactful. As the night drew to a close, the CEO recognized that this experience would stay with him, shaping his approach to leadership and interpersonal interactions in the future. The events had provided a powerful reminder that success is not solely about wealth, authority, or intelligence. It is also about how one treats others, maintains composure, and navigates the complex dynamics of human interaction. The loss of the $3.5 billion deal, though significant, carried an even greater lesson. Humility, respect, and professionalism are indispensable tools for leadership and success. The waitress, finishing her final rounds, left the restaurant quietly. She did not seek acknowledgement for her role in the evening, yet her actions had created a lasting impression on all those who observed them. Her professionalism, calmness, and dignity had influenced the partner's perception, highlighting the contrast between her composed behavior and the CEO's impatience. In doing so, She had provided a powerful example of the impact of human behavior, respect, and integrity. The CEO, reflecting on the evening, began to understand that every interaction, no matter how small, carries weight. Words spoken in haste, impatience displayed under pressure, and disregard for dignity can have consequences that reach far beyond the immediate moment. The experience served as a vivid reminder that success is multidimensional, relying not only on knowledge and strategy but also on emotional intelligence, respect, and composure. By the time he left the restaurant, the CEO had absorbed the lessons of the evening. He knew that future opportunities would require a different approach, one that balanced expertise with empathy, authority with respect, and ambition with humility. The $3.5 billion deal was lost, but the insight gained was invaluable. The events had provided a clear and unforgettable lesson in leadership, human behavior, and the subtle power of professionalism. The night ended with a sense of quiet reflection. The restaurant, now empty, held the echoes of an evening that had been as much about character and conduct as about business and finance. The CEO walked away with a deep understanding of the importance of respect, patience, and human dignity. The waitress, through her composed professionalism, had taught a lesson that numbers and strategy alone could never convey. The story of the evening would linger, a reminder that in business and in life, the treatment of others and the grace with which one conducts oneself can have consequences far beyond what is immediately visible.